and welcome to the Shipper Update. I'm Anthony Smith, lead economist and strategic executive producer. But I'm going to put on my lead economist hat here. I'm also joined by Zach Strickland, our director of freight intelligence, and we're going to go into some things happening with the consumers. We're also going to talk about some of the upstream impacts that's going on as well. But what we have here is the ISM MPRI. If you don't know, if you're not a Sonar user, that is the pricing component for the ISM PMI. And what we can see there is at an 88.0, still well above 50. And so if you're not familiar with the ISM PMI, anything above 50, of course, is indicative of expansion, while anything below 50, excuse me, is indicative of contraction. And so when we're looking at a subtle dip down from the 90s to 88, that doesn't mean that there is actual downward movement in the ISM PMI price component or that manufacturers are seeing lower prices, but that the increase in prices is slightly slowing a little bit.
Yeah, we look at a chart, you look at the ISMs and these diffusion indexes on a chart and you think, oh, things are getting softer. Not at all. It's expanding much more slowly.
Exactly.
Or not much more slowly, but slightly more slowly. And it tops out at 100, right, Anthony?
Right.
So we're still we still got a little bit of headroom here, but not a lot. I mean, this is one of the fastest growing things. And we talk about it in the context of freight. What does this mean downstream? As prices are increasing, especially for manufacturing, what the ISM does focus on, what does that mean in terms of overall inputs? We talked about it last week on Freightonomics with the Rogers voice. A lot of that inflationary pressure is not getting passed along to the consumers just yet. So maybe we're not going to see this, impact demand, at least in the near term. Is that right?
That's right. And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, in the next chart, I think we'll see some of that. But that inflationary pressure hasn't really been as difficult as we would have expected. And so in our next chart, we're going to see what really is happening on the consumer side. And we see that they're finally starting to, we see this upward movement, but this is the fastest pace for core, or I should say overall consumer price index, the CPI here.
Right. And which is the inflationary number that the economists like yourself use, right? This is what we look at to say, okay, how fast are prices increasing, especially, in relation to wages and wage growth.
Right.
Like, are people able to absorb these inflationary pressures? Because we want a little bit of inflation, right?
That's what they say. They said we want to aim right around that 2% mark here, but right now what we're looking at over the last year, it's right around 5%. And so this is the fastest pace that we've seen, I think, in well over 13 years. And so I think this is definitely the early stages. And as we've seen how elevated that manufacturing prices were for so long and how high it still kind of maintained that level, this upward movement might just be the tip of the iceberg, so to say. And so we can probably expect more price increases for those consumers. But the thing is, they don't seem to care too much.
Yeah, we talked about it in detail last week, but it's fascinating to see. Obviously you need to be concerned about this. We were worried about this way back when this first started happening. We're like, okay, we put all this money into the economy. Now consumers are gonna have all this money initially. It'll bring up prices, and then it'll eventually be like, well, we can't afford those prices anymore. And that's what you're concerned about with runaway inflation, you know, and you don't want to have too much of that because eventually your demand side stuff starts getting impacted. That means less freight moving on trucks, and also, the economy itself kind of dwindles when you have that, right?
Exactly, and so I think what we're going to also see in our next chart is what we're going to have to really do in order to kind of keep freight moving along. And so in our next chart, we're going to look at right here, job openings overall. And so what we're looking at job openings, we're looking at manufacturing right now here on this Sonar chart, and we're seeing that specifically in manufacturing, that's one of the hottest areas. And that was one of the leading areas, or the leading area for job openings over the last month's report. We saw, of course, hospitality, retail, segments like that, but manufacturers are needing and are in dire need of these employees to kind of get back into those manufacturing facilities and help reduce all this demand that's going on right now.
Yeah, this is a decent sign to me, I think, in the way that, obviously we're going to need to have people to produce things. It feels like the front end of the recovery almost, because there's still so much left. If they're hiring at this rate, Anthony, can we not necessarily expect a little bit of a boost, this year even, once they get some of these people filling these positions?
That's exactly it. And so we're going to have to expect a boost, but we're also seeing that there's a lot of friction because a lot of employees or consumers right now are quitting their jobs left and right. So that quit rate is extraordinarily high. People are getting very particular about which jobs they take, kind of have the right wages, and of course those incentives are also playing a huge role. Not only the incentives to not return to work, but also those incentives put in place by employers, namely manufacturers, maybe sign-on bonuses or different kind of work hours and opportunities. Of course, you might not be able to do manufacturing remote just yet, but
still working on that technology.
Still working on it, and I'm sure it's right around the corner. But speaking into that, we might catch up a little bit later on about what some of those changes are within those manufacturing facilities and how some of those individuals might not be returning to the same workplace that they left.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see, especially as we've seen a lot of those workers, the blue collar workers, find other jobs while their jobs were offline, during the pandemic. So chaos all around still.
Chaos all around. So, thank you so much for joining us for that shipper update. Kaylee, over to you.